I told God I hated him. 5 months later, my son tried to hang himself in jail. What happened next changed everything. I'm Carol, and this is how God met me when I had nothing left. But to understand that moment, I need to take you back 9 months earlier, to the day my husband died and my whole world fell apart. Richard wasn't just my husband of 34 years. He was my best friend, my prayer partner, the spiritual leader of our home. Every morning before the sun came up, I'd find him in his chair by the window, reading his worn Bible with his coffee cooling beside him. He was the kind of man who prayed over everything, over our meals, over our finances, over our son. He'd put his hand on Jake's shoulder and pray these powerful prayers. Prayers for protection, for wisdom, for Jake to grow into a man of God. Jake worshiped his father. They had this bond I couldn't quite put into words. Every Saturday, they'd go fishing together at the lake. It wasn't really about the fish. It was their time to talk. About life. About faith. About dreams. Richard worked as an electrician for 30 years. He wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. But he was faithful. And I truly thought, that mattered. That faithfulness protected you. March 12th started like any other Wednesday. Richard kissed me goodbye at 6:30 a.m., just like he did every morning. He told me he loved me. He said he'd be home by 5 for dinner. He never made it home. His coworker found him collapsed in the warehouse at 2:47 p.m. Massive heart attack. He was 58 years old. By the time I got to the hospital, he was already gone, just like that. No warning, no goodbye, no time to prepare. The funeral was 4 days later. The church was packed. Richard had touched so many lives. People kept coming up to me, hugging me, telling me how sorry they were, telling me he was in a better place. In a better place. I wanted to scream. A better place? He belonged here, with me, with Jake. But I didn't scream. I smiled, I thanked them. I said all the right things, because that's what you do, right? When you're a woman of faith, you're supposed to be strong. You're supposed to trust God's plan. Jake gave the eulogy. He stood up there, 28 years old, and he tried so hard to hold it together. His voice cracked when he talked about those Saturday mornings at the lake, about how his dad taught him everything, how to change a tire, how to pray, how to be a man. My dad always said, Jake told the crowd, his hands gripping the podium so hard his knuckles were white, that God had a plan for my life, that no matter what happened, God was in control. He paused then, and I saw something flicker across his face, something dark. I'm trying to believe that, he said quietly. I'm really trying. They played my husband's favorite hymn as they carried the casket out. It is well with my soul. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. I remember sitting in that pew, unable to sing, thinking, it's not well. Nothing is well, and I don't know if it ever will be again. The weeks after the funeral were a blur. People brought food. They called. They sent cards. But by week 3, the calls slowed down. By week 4, they stopped coming by. Life went on for everyone else. But not for us. I threw myself into being strong for Jake. He'd moved back home after Richard died. Said he couldn't stand being alone in his apartment. I was glad. I didn't want to be alone either, but something was wrong. I could feel it. Jake started sleeping all day, staying up all night. He said he couldn't sleep in his old room, too many memories. He'd disappear for hours without explanation. When I asked where he'd been, he'd snap at me. Just out, Mom. I needed air. His eyes changed. They were hollow. Empty. One morning, about a month after the funeral, I went into the bathroom and found Jake hunched over the sink, staring at himself in the mirror. He didn't hear me come in. Jake? I said softly. He jumped, spun around. Jesus, Mom! You scared me. Sorry, honey. Are you okay? He looked at me, and for just a second, I saw so much pain in his eyes that it took my breath away. No, he said. I'm not okay. Dad's dead. And the God he spent his whole life serving didn't even give us a warning. Didn't give us a chance to say goodbye. What kind of God does that? Jake dash dash. You know what I think? His voice was rising now. I think Dad wasted his life. All those prayers, all that faith. For what? To die at 58 in a warehouse? That's God's plan? That's God's love? Don't say that, I whispered. Why not? It's true. He pushed past me out of the bathroom. I'm done pretending God cares. Because if he did, Dad would still be here. I stood there in the bathroom, my hand on the sink where Jake's had just been, and I tried to pray. But the words wouldn't come. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of the end, for both of us. I tried to go back to church the Sunday after that conversation with Jake. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, watching people walk in. People who would tell me Richard was in a better place or that God needed another angel. I couldn't do it. I drove home. That was the beginning. People called. Pastor Mike visited. They meant well, but every word felt hollow. God won't give you more than you can handle. But I was drowning. Everything happens for a reason. What reason? At least he's free from pain. He wasn't in pain. He was supposed to grow old with me. By month 3, the calls stopped. I was alone with my grief and my son's growing addiction. On July 15th, at 3:47 in the morning, I pulled out my Bible, the one my mother had given me when I was 16. 46 years of underlining verses, writing notes, trusting. I threw it across the room as hard as I could. It hit the wall and fell to the floor, pages crumpled. I stared at it, and then I screamed into the darkness. I hate you. I hate you. The words tore out of me, raw and ugly. I meant every single one. And then, nothing, just emptiness. I didn't open it again for months. Have you ever been so angry at God that you couldn't even pray? Comment me too if you've been there. I need you to know it's okay. God can handle your anger. While I was losing my faith, Jake was losing himself. His doctor prescribed anxiety medication after the funeral, then pain pills for his back. Just for a few days, Mom. But the pills didn't stop. Money went missing. My jewelry disappeared. Then Richard's watch, the one Jake knew meant everything to me. When I confronted him, he exploded. I didn't take anything. Why are you always accusing me? I wanted to believe him. He started disappearing for days. He lost weight. Dark circles under his eyes. Gray skin. Jake, are you okay? I'm fine, Mom. Stop worrying. But he wasn't fine. The first overdose, I thought he was dead. I found him passed out on the couch, blue-lipped, not breathing. The paramedics found an empty pill bottle. 60 pills. Filled 4 days ago. They gave him Narcan. He woke up confused, defensive. It was an accident, Mom. I just lost track. I called my prayer chain. I fasted. I anointed his door with oil like I'd seen at revival meetings. Nothing changed. Jake went to rehab in August. 28 days, $7,000 from Richard's life insurance. He came home sober, promising, I'm done with that stuff, Mom. He lasted 11 days. I sat on the bathroom floor next to his unconscious body and prayed, God, please, please save my son. Please don't take him from me too. Silence. Over the following months, Jake went to rehab 3 more times. I tried everything the church told me. Spiritual warfare prayers, deliverance ministry. A visiting evangelist laid hands on Jake to cast out the demon of addiction. Jake's eyes were dead the whole time. 2 days later, he was high again. Over $20,000. That's what I spent trying to save him. Richard's life insurance, my security, gone. And Jake was still using. People from church stopped calling. Or maybe I stopped answering. I was angry at Jake, at the drugs, at the doctors. But most of all, I was angry at God. I had done everything right. I had prayed. I had fasted. I had trusted. And God had given me nothing but silence and loss. My husband was dead. My son was destroying himself. My faith was in ruins, and I was completely, utterly alone. 8 months after Richard died, I hit a point where I couldn't even pretend anymore. I stopped getting out of bed unless I had to. I stopped cooking. I lived on crackers and cheese and whatever frozen meals I could microwave. I stopped showering regularly. I stopped caring about anything. The house, the house Richard and I had bought 30 years ago, the house where we raised Jake, became a prison. Everywhere I looked, I saw memories. Richard's chair by the window, the kitchen table where we'd eaten breakfast together for 3 decades, the photos on the walls of happier times. I took down all the pictures. I couldn't stand looking at them. Jake was barely home anymore. When he did come home, we didn't speak. We'd pass each other in the hallway like strangers. Sometimes I'd hear him in his room at night, and I knew he was high, and I just didn't care anymore. I didn't have the energy to fight. I didn't have the energy to hope. One Sunday morning, I remember it was a Sunday because I could hear church bells from down the street. I drove to the church parking lot again. I hadn't been inside in 8 months. I sat in my car watching people go in. The same people I'd known for 15 years. Good people. People who loved God, who believed in His goodness, who trusted His plan. I couldn't do it. I put the car in reverse and drove away, and as I drove, I said out loud, "I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend to believe in you when you've taken everything from me." And for the first time, I felt something close to relief. Because I'd finally said it out loud. I'd finally admitted what had been true for months. I didn't believe anymore. One night in November, it was cold, I remember, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. Jake came home at 2 a.m. I was awake. I was always awake. I heard him stumble through the front door, heard him knock something over in the living room, heard him cursing under his breath. And something in me snapped. I got out of bed, went downstairs, and found him sprawled on the couch, eyes half closed, barely conscious. "Jake," I said. He didn't respond. "Jake!" Louder this time. His eyes opened slightly. "What?" "I can't do this anymore." He laughed. Actually laughed. This bitter, hollow sound. "Do what, Mom?" "Watch me destroy myself?" "Yeah, I know. You tell me every day." "No." My voice was shaking. "I mean, I can't save you. I've tried everything. I've spent every penny I had. I've prayed every prayer I know, and it's not working. Nothing is working, so I'm done." He sat up a little, suddenly more alert. "What do you mean you're done?" "I mean, I can't save you. I can't even save myself. So you're going to have to figure this out on your own, because I have nothing left to give you." "Mom, no." I was crying now. "Your father is dead. You're killing yourself. And I've lost everything. My husband, my son, my faith, everything. So I'm sorry, Jake, but I can't do this anymore. I just can't." I turned and walked back upstairs, leaving him there on the couch. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in months. And it changed nothing. The next few weeks were the darkest of my life. I stopped praying entirely. Not because I was trying to make a point, but because I genuinely had nothing to say to God anymore. What was there to say? Help me? He hadn't helped. Save my son? He wasn't saving him. Show me your plan? There was no plan. There was just chaos and pain and loss. I wondered if God even existed. Maybe Richard had been wrong. Maybe we'd both been wrong. Maybe we'd spent our lives praying to nothing, believing in nothing, trusting in a fairy tale. The thought should have terrified me, but instead, it felt almost freeing. If God didn't exist, then none of this was His fault. It was just bad luck, random tragedy, the universe being cruel and indifferent. And somehow that felt easier to accept than the alternative, that God was real and had chosen to let all this happen anyway. I started thinking about what my life would look like if I just gave up, if I stopped fighting, if I let Jake make his own choices and accepted that I couldn't change the outcome. Maybe he'd hit rock bottom and get help, or maybe he'd die. And God help me, I started to feel numb to both possibilities. I didn't want him to die. I want to be clear about that. But I was so tired of living in constant fear, constant grief, constant desperation. I was tired of waiting for God to do something. I was tired of hoping. I was just tired. On December 3rd, a few weeks after I'd stopped praying, about 5 months after I'd thrown my Bible, almost 9 months after Richard died, my phone rang at 4:37 in the morning. Nothing good ever happens at 4:37 in the morning. I saw the number. County jail. My stomach dropped. I answered. Hello? Ma'am, this is Deputy Stevens with the county sheriff's office. Is this Carol Henderson? Yes. Ma'am, we have your son Jake Henderson in custody. He was arrested last night for possession. He's asking for you. I should have felt something. Fear, worry, panic. But I just felt empty. Okay, I said. Ma'am, there's something else. The deputy's voice changed, became gentler. Your son. He tried to hurt himself tonight, in his cell. We stopped him, but he's in medical right now, and he's asking to speak with you. The emptiness cracked just a little. Is he okay? Physically, yes, but ma'am, I think you should come down here. I got in my car at 4:52 a.m. and drove to the county jail. And for the first time in weeks, I prayed. It wasn't a nice prayer. It wasn't a faithful prayer. It was barely a prayer at all. But as I drove through the dark, empty streets, I heard myself say out loud, God, if you're real, if you're actually real and not just something I made up to make sense of this life, prove it. Because I'm done pretending I believe in you. I'm done pretending any of this makes sense. So if you're there, if you care at all, prove it. Right now. I didn't expect an answer. I didn't expect anything. But I needed to say it. I needed to throw down that challenge to finally admit that I was standing on the edge of complete and total unbelief. And then I drove to the jail to see my son, not knowing that everything was about to change. When I got to the county jail, they made me wait in a sterile visiting room with fluorescent lights and metal chairs bolted to the floor. I sat there for 20 minutes staring at the scratched metal table, trying to prepare myself for whatever I was about to see. I'd been here before. 3 times, actually. 3 times I'd bailed Jake out, driven him home, listened to his promises that it would be different this time. But this time felt different. Not because I had hope, I didn't. But because I knew somehow that this was the end of something. One way or another, this was it. The door opened and a deputy brought Jake in. He looked terrible. His face was pale with dark circles under his eyes. He had scrapes on his neck and wrists. From the struggle when they'd pulled him down, I realized later. His orange jumpsuit hung loose on his frame. He'd lost so much weight, but it was his eyes that stopped me. They weren't empty anymore. They were full of something I couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe, or awe, or both. He sat down across from me, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. Mom, he finally said, his voice cracking. Jake. My voice was flat. I didn't have anything left to give him. What happened? He looked down at his hands, and when he looked back up at me, his eyes were filled with tears. Mom, I tried to kill myself. I'd known that already. The deputy had told me. But hearing Jake say it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Because I couldn't do it anymore. Living like this. Being like this. I kept thinking about Dad and how disappointed he would be if he could see me now, and I wanted it to be over. Tears were running down his face now, but he didn't wipe them away. I ripped my sheet into strips. I tied them together. I made a noose. His voice was shaking. I put it around my neck, Mom. I was ready. I wanted to die. My hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles were white. And then he stopped, took a shaky breath. Mom, I heard Dad's voice. I felt something cold wash over me. What? I heard Dad's voice. As clear as I'm hearing yours right now. As clear as if he was standing right there in that cell with me. Jake ... I know how it sounds. I know. But Mom, I'm not high right now. I haven't been high in 2 days. They don't let you get high in here. And I'm telling you, I heard him. His eyes were desperate now, pleading with me to believe him. What did he say? My voice was barely audible. Jake's face crumpled and he started to sob. He said, Jake, this isn't how your story ends. Call your mother. The room went silent except for the sound of Jake crying. And then, Mom, I felt something. Like arms around me, like someone was holding me up, even though I was alone in that cell. And I knew it wasn't just Dad, it was God. He was looking at me with an intensity I hadn't seen in years. Mom, God saved my life tonight. The God I've been running from, the God I blamed for taking Dad, he saved me. Why? Why would he do that? After everything I've done, after the way I've treated you, after I've cursed him and blamed him and ran from him, why would he give me another chance? I couldn't speak. My throat was tight, my eyes burning with tears I'd been holding back for months. I don't deserve it, Jake whispered. I don't deserve to be alive. But he kept me alive anyway. And I think he's been keeping me alive this whole time. All those overdoses, all those times I should have died. Mom, he's been saving me over and over, and I've been too blind to see it. I stared at my son across that cold metal table in a county jail visiting room, and something inside me began to crack. All those times Jake had overdosed, 4 times in 9 months, and he'd survived, every single time. The stranger who'd called 911 when Jake collapsed in a parking lot. The paramedic who'd had Narcan in his bag when Jake's heart stopped. The cop who'd driven Jake to the hospital instead of just arresting him. The rehab that had a last-minute opening when everywhere else was full. I'd seen all of that as evidence of God's absence, as proof that my prayers weren't working, that God had abandoned us. But what if it was the opposite? What if God had been answering me all along, just not in the way I'd demanded? I'd prayed for my husband to be healed. God took him home. I'd prayed for Jake to never touch drugs. God let him fall into addiction. I'd prayed for answers. God gave me silence, but he kept Jake alive. Through 4 overdoses, twice at home, once in a parking lot where a stranger called 911, once on the street where a cop drove him to the ER instead of booking him. Through countless dangerous situations. Through a suicide attempt. He kept Jake breathing when Jake didn't even want to breathe anymore. Mom? Jake's voice broke through my thoughts. Say something. Please. I ... I started, but I didn't know how to finish. How do you put into words the feeling of ice breaking after a long, brutal winter? How do you describe the moment when everything you thought was true shifts and rearranges itself into a completely different picture? I've been so angry, I finally said, my voice shaking. At you, at God, at everyone. I thought he'd abandoned us. I thought all my prayers had been for nothing. I know, Jake said softly. I thought the same thing. But you're alive. The words came out as almost a question. You're sitting here right now and you're alive. I'm alive. And you heard your father's voice? I heard his voice, Mom. I swear to you, I heard him. I looked at my son, really looked at him for the first time in months. And I saw it. Behind the exhaustion and the shame and the fear, I saw something I hadn't seen since before Richard died. I saw hope. Jake, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I think God's been answering me this whole time, just not the way I wanted. Fresh tears spilled down my cheeks. I wanted him to fix everything. To make it easy. To take away the pain and the fear and the struggle, but he didn't do that. No, Jake agreed quietly. He didn't. But he kept you alive. Every single time you should have died, he kept you alive. Jake nodded, crying now too. He did. I don't understand it, I said. And I was crying so hard now I could barely speak. I don't understand why he took your father. I don't understand why he let you fall into this. I don't understand any of it. Neither do I. But you're alive, Jake. You're alive and you heard your father's voice and you felt God holding you up. And that has to mean something. Mom, Jake said, reaching across the table to take my hand. The first time he'd touched me with affection in months. I'm done running. I'm done fighting. I'm done pretending I can do this on my own. Whatever happens next, rehab, jail, whatever, I'm done running from God. I squeezed his hand, and for the first time in 8 months, I felt something other than numbness. I felt possibility. The deputy told me visiting hours were over. I had to leave Jake there in that jail, but for the first time in months, I wasn't terrified of what would happen to him. I drove home as the sun was starting to rise. One of those beautiful December sunrises where everything is pink and gold, and the whole world looks new. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd actually looked at a sunrise. When I got home, I went straight to my bedroom. The Bible was still on the shelf where I'd put it after throwing it across the room 5 months earlier. I picked it up. The pages were still a little crumpled from where it had hit the wall. I sat on the edge of my bed, the bed I'd shared with Richard for 34 years, and I opened it. It fell open to Psalm 34. I don't know if Richard had marked it or if it was just chance, but there was a verse underlined. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. And in the margin, in Richard's handwriting, there was a note. June 1997, when we lost the baby. He was close then too. I'd forgotten. Before Jake was born, we'd lost a baby at 6 months. I remembered sitting in a hospital room feeling exactly like I'd felt these past 9 months. Abandoned by God, furious, broken. And I remembered. We'd made it through. God had been close then, even when I couldn't feel him. I ran my fingers over Richard's handwriting and something broke open in my chest. God, I said out loud, my voice shaking. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if you even want to hear me after everything I've said, after I threw this Bible across the room, after I told you I hated you, after I walked away from you. I took a shaky breath, but Jake said he heard Richard's voice. He said he felt you holding him up. And I need to know if that's real. Silence, but not the empty silence I'd felt for 8 months. This was different. This felt full, like someone was listening. I wanted my husband back, I continued, tears streaming down my face now. I wanted Jake to never touch drugs. I wanted answers. I wanted you to fix everything the way I thought it should be fixed. And you didn't do that. You took Richard home. You let Jake fall into addiction. You let me lose everything. I was crying so hard now I could barely get the words out. But you kept us alive. Both of us. When Jake wanted to die, you kept him breathing. When I wanted to give up, you kept me going. So I don't understand. I don't understand your timeline. I don't understand why it had to be this hard. I'm still hurt. I'm still confused. I looked down at Richard's note in the margin. But I'm done fighting you. If you're there, and I think you are, I'm done running. I'm done being angry. I'm done trying to do this alone. Whatever you're doing, however you're working, I'm in. I don't trust you yet. Not completely, but I want to. I want to learn how to trust you again. Show me how. I sat there in the silence, holding Richard's Bible, and I waited. And then I felt it. Not a voice, not a vision, just a presence. Like warmth spreading through my chest, like being wrapped in something I couldn't see but could absolutely feel, like being held. The words came, not audibly, but so clearly, I knew they weren't mine. I never left. I've been here the whole time, in every hospital room, every sleepless night, every moment you thought you were alone. I never left you. And suddenly, I could see it all differently. The stranger who called 911, the Narcan that arrived just in time, the rehab opening, the court-appointed lawyer who actually cared, my neighbor who checked on me even when I stopped answering the door, my sister who kept calling even when I never called back. Every single time I'd thought God was absent, he'd been there, working through people, keeping us alive, holding us together when we were falling apart. He hadn't given me what I'd asked for. He'd given me what we needed. One more day, one more breath, one more chance. I don't know how long I sat there crying, feeling that presence, letting it sink into the broken places. But when I finally looked up, the sun was fully risen. Light was streaming through my bedroom window. And for the first time in 9 months, I felt something other than grief and anger and emptiness. I felt hope. Not the naive hope I'd had before Richard died. The hope that if I did everything right, God would protect me from pain. This was different, deeper, harder won. This was the hope that says, I don't understand. I'm still hurt, but I'm not alone. And somehow, that's enough. And I closed the Bible, held it against my chest, and whispered, okay, I'm in. I don't know what happens next, but I'm in. And I meant it. The next morning, I kept going and I read my Bible again, just one psalm, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I wasn't ready for more than that, but it was a start. Jake called me from jail that afternoon. They were transferring him to a court-mandated rehab program. 90 days this time, longer than he'd ever done before. Mom, I'm scared, he admitted. What if I can't do this? What if I fail again? Then we try again, I said. And I meant it. But Jake, this time is different. This time, God's in it with you. Yeah, he said softly. Yeah, he is. Over the next 3 months, I took baby steps back toward faith. I started attending a small grief support group at a different church. Not my old church, I wasn't ready for that, but a place where people understood loss without offering platitudes. I went to one Sunday service, sat in the very back, left before anyone could talk to me, but I went. Jake wrote me letters from rehab. Real letters, not the manipulative promises I'd gotten used to. He told me about the meetings, about the other guys in the program, about learning to pray again. I don't know if I'm doing it right, he wrote, but I'm trying. I wake up every day and I say, God, help me stay clean today. Just today. And so far, he has. I wrote him back. I told him I was proud of him. I told him I was learning to trust God again too, one day at a time. For the first time in a year, we were honest with each other. Jake completed the 90-day program. He came home in March looking healthier than I'd seen him in over a year. Clear eyes, color in his cheeks, hope in his voice. I'm going to make it this time, Mom, he said. I really am. And I believed him. He got a job at a warehouse, started going to Narcotics Anonymous meetings every night, connected with a sponsor, a guy named Marcus who'd been clean for 8 years. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into 52 days. I counted everyone. On day 53, I came home from the grocery store and found Jake sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. I knew that look. Jake? He looked up at me and his eyes were glazed. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. My first instinct was rage, after everything. After 52 days, after I'd let myself hope again. But then I remembered, my faith couldn't be based on Jake's sobriety. I sat down next to him. What happened? I ran into an old friend. He offered me something. I said no at first. But then, his voice broke. I'm so sorry. I thought I was stronger than this. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw him out. I wanted to give up all over again. Instead, I heard myself say, okay, get up. We're going to a meeting, right now. Mom? Now, Jake, you slipped. You didn't fall all the way back. But you need to get to a meeting right now before this turns into more than one mistake. He looked at me, surprised. Then he nodded. We went to a meeting that night. Jake stood up and said, my name is Jake, and I'm an addict. I relapsed today after 52 days clean. And the room said, keep coming back. Driving home, Jake said, you didn't yell at me. No, I said, because I realized something. My faith can't depend on whether you're sober or not. I have to trust God with you, whether you're clean or using. That doesn't mean I'll enable you, but it means I can't control this. Only God can. That's really hard, Jake said quietly. Yeah, I agreed. It is. But it was also freeing. After that slip, something shifted in Jake. He went back to meetings every single day. He called Marcus twice a day. He got back to work. And this time, he kept going. 90 days, 6 months, 9 months. We started going to family counseling together, something we should have done years ago. We talked about Richard's death, about my grief, about Jake's addiction, about all the ways we'd hurt each other. I stole from you, Jake said in one session, tears running down his face. I stole Dad's watch. I pawned it for drugs. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'd known. Of course I'd known. But hearing him admit it, hearing him take responsibility, that was new. I forgive you, I said. And I meant it. I blamed you, I admitted, for not being strong enough, for not loving your father enough to stay sober for him. That wasn't fair. You were grieving, Jake said. You were allowed to be angry, but I took it out on you. And I'm sorry. We were learning, slowly, painfully, but we were learning. I went back to church, a different one where nobody knew my story unless I chose to tell it. I joined a women's Bible study, made new friends who'd been through their own dark nights. One Sunday, Jake asked if he could come with me. Are you sure? I asked. Yeah, he said, I want to. We sat together in church the first time in over a year. During worship, I heard Jake singing. His voice was quiet, uncertain, but he was singing. And I cried. Right there in the pew, I cried tears of gratitude. 6 months later, Jake got baptized. He stood in front of the whole church and told his story. The addiction, the overdoses, the suicide attempt, the voice in the jail cell. I was dead, he told them. And God brought me back to life. If he can do it for me, he can do it for anyone. Watching my son get baptized, watching him go under the water and come up with joy on his face, I felt something I hadn't felt since before Richard died. I felt whole. Not healed, not completely. The grief was still there. The missing Richard was still there. But I was whole, and so was Jake. After the baptism, we went out to lunch, just the two of us. And Jake said something that made me stop mid-bite. Dad would be proud of us, you know. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The boy who'd been destroying himself a year ago was gone. This was a man. A man who'd fought his way through hell and come out stronger. Yeah, I said, smiling through tears. Yeah, he would be. Jake started volunteering at the church's recovery ministry. He led a small group for young men struggling with addiction. Every week I'd watch him share his story, watch him give hope to guys who looked just like he used to look, hopeless, broken, desperate. And I realized God hadn't wasted any of it. Not Richard's death, not Jake's addiction, not my crisis of faith. He was using all of it. My theology had changed. I didn't believe anymore that God caused pain to teach lessons. I believed we lived in a broken world where bad things happened, and God met us in those broken places. God didn't cause Richard's heart attack, but he carried me through the grief. God didn't cause Jake's addiction, but he kept Jake alive through it, and he used it to bring both of us to a deeper faith than we'd ever had before. I didn't serve God now because life was easy or because he always answered my prayers the way I wanted. I served him because he'd proven himself faithful in the darkness. And that was a faith worth having. Today, Jake has been clean for 3 years and 7 months, but more than that, he's whole. He's alive in a way he wasn't even before the addiction started. He leads a recovery group at our church every Wednesday night. He mentors young men who are where he used to be. Last week, a kid with 10 days clean looked at Jake and said, "Man, you give me hope. If you made it, maybe I can too." And Jake looked at him with tears in his eyes and said, "Brother, I was dead. I had a noose around my neck in a jail cell. And God brought me back to life. If he can do it for me, he can do it for anyone." Our bathroom, the one where I once found Jake unconscious, where I screamed at God in my darkest moments. That's where Jake reads his Bible every morning now. That's where he prays. I found Richard's old journal a few months ago, tucked away in a box I hadn't opened since he died. On the last page he ever wrote, dated 2 days before his heart attack, he'd written a prayer. Lord, if something ever happens to me, please protect my family. Draw them closer to you. Use even my death, if you have to bring them into deeper faith. I sat on the floor and cried when I read that, because God had answered Richard's prayer. Just not the way any of us would have chosen. I mentor other mothers now, women whose sons are addicted, women who've lost husbands, women who are angry at God and don't know how to find their way back. I sit with them in coffee shops and church basements, and I tell them, I get it. I've been there. And I'm here to tell you, you're not alone. People ask me sometimes, do you understand now why God let this happen? Do you have your answers? And I tell them the truth. No, I don't. I still don't know why God took Richard at 58. I still don't fully understand why he allowed Jake to fall so far into addiction. Some days I think about God's sovereignty, that he could have prevented it all but chose not to for reasons I can't see. Other days, I think we just live in a broken world, and bad things happen, and God grieves with us. Maybe both are true somehow. I don't know. What I do know is this: God didn't waste our pain. He met me in that jail visiting room when I had nothing left. He kept Jake alive through 4 overdoses when statistically he should have died. He used the worst year of my life to give me the deepest, most real faith I've ever had. I don't serve God now because my life is easy. I don't serve him because he always gives me what I ask for. I serve him because he proved himself faithful in the absolute darkest place I've ever been. My faith before Richard died was shallow. Everything was good, so God was good. That's easy faith. This faith, this hard-won, battle-tested, forged in fire faith, this is real. And I wouldn't go back to who I was before even if I could. Would I choose this pain? Never. Would I bring Richard back if I could? In a heartbeat. Would I erase Jake's addiction if I had the power? Absolutely. But I can't change the past. None of us can. All we can do is choose what we do with the pain we've been given, and I choose to let God use it. If you're watching this right now and you're angry at God, I get it. I've been there. I screamed at him. I hated him. I threw my Bible across the room and walked away from church for 8 months. And you know what? He never walked away from me. If you've lost someone, to death, to addiction, to anything that makes you question if God even exists, I can't promise you he'll fix everything the way you want. I can't promise you'll get your answers, but I can promise you this: he's in the darkness with you, and if you let him, he'll meet you there. If you or someone you love is struggling with addiction, please, please reach out. There are resources. There's help. You don't have to do this alone. Narcotics Anonymous has meetings in every city. There is hope. There is help. If you're struggling with faith, if you're questioning everything you used to believe, start where I started. You don't need a perfect prayer. You don't need to have it all figured out. Just say, God, if you're real, show me. That's enough. He'll meet you there. And if you want to give your life to Jesus, or if you walked away from him like I did and you want to come back, you can pray with me right now. It doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to be honest. Pray this with me. God, I don't understand everything. I don't have all the answers, but I'm tired of doing this alone. I believe you're real. I believe you love me. I'm sorry for running from you. Come into my life. Show me who you are. Help me trust you even when I don't understand. I'm yours. Amen. If you prayed that prayer, welcome home. You're not alone anymore. My name is Carol. I'm 65 years old now. And a little over 3 years ago, I thought my story was over. But God wasn't done writing it yet, and he's not done writing yours either.